My name is Evan Miller, 25, nearly finished with a master's in education, and living on instant noodles and tutoring gigs. When the university referral office emailed me about a long-term position helping a 16-year-old with math, I accepted before reading the fine print. The pay was generous, the schedule flexible, and the address was in the quiet, upper-end district of Maple Hill, a world far removed from my creaky student apartment. The cab wound through narrow streets lined with maples and stately brick homes until it stopped in front of an ivy-clad house with white shutters. The gate squeaked open when I pushed it. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and old books, like the inside of a forgotten library. I straightened my shirt, clutched my folder of lesson plans, and rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened to reveal a man whose calm presence silenced the air around him. Nathan Cole, I recognized the name from the referral form, stood there in a charcoal sweater, sleeves rolled to his elbows, spectacles hanging from his collar. His eyes were the color of brewed tea, watchful and intelligent. He looked somewhere in his 40s, but there was a steadiness to him that made time seem irrelevant. "Evan Miller?" he asked. His voice had a low, composed warmth. "Yes, sir. The tutor." He smiled, a polite half-curve of his mouth. "Come in. Liam's finishing a snack. I hope you don't mind the mess. The house has been quieter than it should be lately." Inside, the air carried that cedar scent again. Books, polished wood, and faint coffee. The living room walls were lined floor to ceiling with shelves crammed with history volumes and framed photographs. A younger Nathan beside a woman with laughing eyes, then the same woman holding a baby. The pictures stopped abruptly after that child's early years. I didn't need to ask why. Nathan led me down the hall to a sunlit study that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Mahogany desk, green shaded lamp, and an upright piano against the wall. "Liam studies here," he said. "He's a bright kid, but math gives him grief. He's 16. Smart enough to argue, stubborn enough to lose track of homework." "I can handle stubborn," I said, forcing an easy grin. That earned a real smile from him, small, genuine, quick. "Good. You'll need it." Moments later, Liam bounded in, curly-haired and awkward in that teenager way, shaking my hand with a quick nod. "Hey!" We started the session right away. He wasn't bad at math, just anxious about it. As we worked through algebra problems, I could feel Nathan's presence now and then. His quiet footsteps in the hall, the sound of pages turning somewhere nearby. Once, I glanced toward the doorway and caught him standing there, pretending to browse a bookshelf, though his eyes were unmistakably fixed on us. After an hour, Liam's attention waned, and we took a break. Nathan appeared with a tray, 3 glasses of lemonade, condensation beading along the rims. "Tutors need sugar too," he said lightly. He sat on the edge of the armchair, listening as Liam explained what we'd covered. The pride in his gaze softened his otherwise reserved demeanor. When Liam left to fetch a notebook, Nathan turned to me. "You make him feel capable. Not everyone can do that." "I just try to make math sound less like punishment," I replied. He chuckled, quiet but sincere. "Maybe you should come teach my students that trick." Only later did I learn he was a history professor at the local college. It made sense, the measured tone, the deliberate phrasing, the way he listened more than he spoke. There was something magnetic about his calmness, a gravity that drew me in without my permission. As the afternoon waned, sunlight slanted across the wooden floorboards, catching dust motes that drifted like slow sparks. Liam packed his bag, mumbling about soccer practice. Nathan followed us to the door. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said, and extended my hand. He shook it, steady, warm, lingering just a fraction longer than formality required. A faint smile crossed his face before he released me. Walking back down the quiet street, I realized I could still feel the weight of that handshake, the subtle electricity of being noticed. Not as a student, not as a stranger, but as someone seen. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into a simple gesture between 2 polite men. But something in the way he'd looked at me, curious, restrained, as if testing the distance between professionalism and something far less safe, stayed with me long after I'd left. That night, as I entered grades on my laptop, my thoughts kept drifting to the shelves of books, to his voice low in the hallway, to the faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I thought I was there to teach his son, but soon, it felt like I was the one learning something I wasn't ready for. By the second week, the Cole house began to feel less like a stranger's home and more like a rhythm I had unconsciously memorized. 3 afternoons a week, I walked through the tall white door, hung my jacket by the stairs, and followed the soft ticking of the grandfather clock to the study room where Liam and I worked. It became a small ritual, the faint scent of cedar greeting me first, the sound of pages turning somewhere in the house, and then Nathan's polite, steady voice offering a quiet hello from down the hall. Liam and I settled into a routine of algebra equations, mock tests, and light banter. He was bright, quick to joke, and easily distracted. Sometimes, halfway through a problem, he'd lean back and ask, "How old are you again?" Or, "Do you think college is actually worth it?" I'd smile and answer, but part of my mind would drift to the footsteps that passed the doorway every so often, the soft, measured ones that belonged to Nathan. He'd usually appear around the halfway mark of each session, a tray in hand. "Tea, lemonade, or coffee?" he'd ask, every time as if it were the first. His tone was casual, but there was always a subtle pause before he turned to leave, as if he wanted to stay longer but didn't want to make it obvious. At first, I thought I imagined the warmth in his gaze, but as the weeks passed, I caught it more often, the faint softening around his eyes, the way his smile shifted when it was directed only at me. It started with brief exchanges that stretched into conversations after lessons ended. Sometimes, while Liam rushed upstairs to take a call or play a game, Nathan would linger in the study. We talked about teaching methods, about how students responded better when they were seen rather than lectured. I told him about my education program. He told me about his years as a history lecturer and the challenges of making the past feel relevant. He had this quiet fascination with small details, how people from different centuries repeated the same mistakes, the way civilizations rose and fell around the same desires. Love, ambition, fear. Once, when I admitted that I loved history too, he smiled faintly. "Then you'll understand why I keep the house the way it is," he said. "Some people call it old-fashioned. I call it remembering." That was the first time I noticed how his voice lowered when he spoke about memory. Over time, those moments became the highlight of my visits. The sessions with Liam were my duty. The talks with Nathan were my quiet indulgence. One afternoon, I arrived early, the house unusually silent. Nathan was in the living room, adjusting a frame on the wall. The photo was of him, his late wife, and a much younger Liam, all sunlight and laughter. He must have seen the question in my expression, because he said softly, 3 years. She passed suddenly. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded once, his hand still resting on the frame. "You know what's strange? The house stayed exactly the same afterward. Same furniture, same books, same everything. But it's like it stopped breathing. I thought time would fix it." He paused, glancing toward the hallway where Liam's room was. It didn't. The air felt thick with something I didn't have words for. I didn't say anything, but in that silence, something unspoken passed between us. Empathy, maybe, or recognition. From that day, the distance between us grew smaller in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The next week, I came in for a session before heading to a university interview. I wore a tie that refused to cooperate. As I stood in front of the study mirror tugging at it, Nathan appeared behind me. "May I?" he asked. Before I could answer, his fingers brushed against my collar. Steady, sure, patient. He tightened the knot and adjusted the fabric until it lay neatly against my shirt. His hand lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. "There," he said, voice quiet enough to almost vanish. "Now you look like a man who knows where he's going." My throat went dry. "Thank you," I managed, forcing a smile. He stepped back, clearing his throat. "Good luck with the interview." That small moment replayed in my head for days. The warmth of his hand near my neck, the faint scent of his cologne. Something woody and subtle. It was nothing, I told myself. Just kindness. But it didn't feel like nothing. A few sessions later, I decided to bring coffee for him. A gesture of gratitude? Maybe, or a quiet attempt to bridge whatever existed between us. He looked genuinely surprised when I handed it over. For me? He asked. You always bring something for us. It's my turn, I said. He smiled, really smiled this time, not the polite version I was used to. That's thoughtful, Evan. Thank you. He took a sip, closed his eyes briefly, and said, Perfect. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. Over the next month, our conversations deepened. We debated books, shared favorite authors, even exchanged notes on how to motivate students. Sometimes he'd quote poetry out of nowhere, testing if I'd recognize it. I usually didn't, but he never seemed disappointed. He just explained, with that soft spark of enthusiasm that made his eyes light up. In return, I told him about my small apartment, my unpaid internship, and how I was terrified of graduating into a life that didn't feel like mine. He listened, really listened, the way no one else did. I realized I was beginning to look forward to the end of each tutoring session. Not for the money, not for Liam's progress, but for those last few minutes when it was just us. Sometimes, I'd find him reading near the fireplace, glasses perched low, one hand wrapped around a mug. He'd glance up and say something ordinary like, "How did the lesson go?" Yet, underneath that, there was always something more. One afternoon, as I was leaving, he called out from the doorway, "Evan." I turned. He hesitated, then said, "I'm glad you took this job." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Me too," I said softly, before stepping out into the golden light of evening. From then on, every interaction carried an undercurrent neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. Like a melody playing just below the noise of daily life. A passing brush of shoulders when reaching for a book. The way our eyes met when we both tried not to look. The quiet comfort of his presence. And the ache it brought with it. There were no grand gestures, no confessions. Just silence thick with meaning. I began to understand that attraction didn't always need words. Sometimes it was in the pauses between them. And maybe, in that silence, he was teaching me something after all. Sometimes his silence said more than his words, and I was beginning to understand a language I wasn't supposed to. It was a Thursday evening when I got the text from Liam. "Hey, sorry, can't make it tonight. Coach extended practice. Dad knows." I almost replied with no problem, but before I could type, another message came through. This one from Nathan. "Since you're already on your way, stay for dinner. The house is too quiet otherwise." I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. I told myself it was harmless, a kind invitation from a polite man. Still, my pulse quickened in a way it shouldn't have. Sure, I wrote back. "See you soon." When I arrived, the house felt different. Maybe it was the hour later than usual, or maybe it was the fact that there was no sound of papers rustling or Liam's voice echoing from the study. The air was calm, almost still, and the evening light filtered through amber curtains, painting the wooden floors with soft gold. Nathan met me at the door, dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him. No sweater vest, just a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled halfway. His hair slightly mussed. The professor mask was gone. He looked human. "Liam's practice ran late," he said, gesturing toward the dining room. "You came all this way. The least I can do is feed you." The dining table was already set. 2 plates, candles flickering low, a bottle of wine breathing open between them. It felt deliberate, intimate, yet not contrived. I sat down, reminding myself that it was dinner, nothing more. He poured himself a modest glass of wine and offered me one, but I shook my head. "Soda's fine. I've got an early morning." "Always responsible," he teased lightly, filling my glass. Dinner was simple, roast chicken, vegetables, and the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward. We talked easily at first, about my thesis, his classes, the quirks of teaching teenagers. Then, as the light dimmed, our conversation shifted, from the safe to the personal. Nathan leaned back, swirling his wine absently. "You ever think about how life keeps asking us to start over, even when we don't want to?" I looked up from my plate. "I think about that a lot lately," I admitted. Finishing school, wondering what comes next. Everyone says I'm still young, but sometimes it feels like I've already missed something important. He nodded slowly. I know that feeling. When my wife died, people told me the same thing. You'll move on. You'll rebuild. They make it sound like it's a project, like you can just start over by deciding to. I didn't interrupt. His tone wasn't bitter. It was weary, fragile in a way that made me want to listen closer. He continued, I miss her, yes. But if I'm being honest, I don't miss us. The last few years before she passed, we were just existing side by side. No anger, no passion, nothing. I think I'd already gone numb before she left. Her death didn't just make me lonely. It made me realize how long I'd already been alone. He stared into his glass as if it held the memory itself. I could feel the weight of those words pressing between us. I said quietly, that kind of honesty takes courage. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Maybe, or maybe it just takes running out of lies. I didn't know what to say to that. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of us dared voice. He broke it first, glancing toward the window. It's a warm night. You'd think it'd be suffocating, but it's gentle somehow. He stood and reached for the wine bottle to pour another glass. As he did, his fingers brushed against mine where they both rested on the table. It wasn't intentional, or maybe it was. Either way, neither of us moved. The air changed, thicker, quieter. He looked down at our hands, then up at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes said everything. Are you feeling this too? I swallowed hard. My instinct was to step back, to restore the invisible line between us. But I didn't. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Evan. Yes. He didn't answer. Instead, he set the bottle down slowly, and for a long second he just stood there, as if waiting for a sign that it was okay to close the space between us. Then he did. It wasn't dramatic. No music, no thunder outside, no storm to hide behind. Just the soft clink of glass, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint flicker of candlelight between us. He leaned forward, and I met him halfway. The kiss was hesitant, the kind that trembles on the edge of being real. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of wine and breath held too long. I felt the years of his restraint, the ache of everything he hadn't said, pressed into that single, fleeting moment. When he finally pulled back, he looked almost startled by his own boldness. He began, but the words didn't come. I shook my head gently. Don't. We stood there in the quiet, facing each other, the space between us both dangerous and magnetic. For a second, I thought he'd lean in again, but he didn't. He only smiled faintly, a smile full of apology and relief all at once. You should probably go, he murmured. Yeah, I said, though every part of me wanted to stay. At the door, I hesitated. He walked me out, his hand brushing mine once more as he opened it. Thank you for dinner, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Thank you for staying, he replied, his tone equally soft. Outside, the night was still warm and heavy with the scent of summer grass. No rain, no wind, just the quiet hum of crickets and my heartbeat racing in my ears. I walked down the stone path toward my car, but halfway there, I stopped and turned. Nathan was still standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, watching me. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. But in that shared silence, something irreversible had shifted. Driving home, I kept touching my lips as if to make sure it had really happened. It wasn't the kind of kiss that begged for more. It was the kind that left you wondering what more even meant. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a moment born from loneliness, but the warmth lingering in my chest refused to fade. It wasn't a grand confession, or a promise, or even something either of us could name, but it was real, and in its quiet way, it felt truer than anything I'd known before. It was only a kiss, but it felt like the truth I'd been running from. The days that followed felt suspended between two worlds, the familiar rhythm of tutoring and the strange, charged silence that had replaced what once felt easy. Liam never mentioned his father's dinner invitation, and Nathan never brought up that night. Yet every time I walked through their front door, I felt the echo of it. The memory of his lips, the warmth of his hand lingering between us like an invisible thread. We pretended nothing had changed, but everything had. During lessons, I caught myself stumbling over equations I'd solved 100 times before. Liam noticed once and laughed. "You good, man? You look like you haven't slept." I forced a grin. "Just tired." Nathan stayed away from the study more than usual. No offers of tea, no quiet interruptions. Only the faint sound of his footsteps upstairs or the occasional shadow crossing the hall. When he did appear, our eyes met for just a heartbeat, long enough to say everything and nothing. Each time it happened, guilt flared inside me. I was his son's tutor. I was supposed to be a professional, not a man losing sleep over a single kiss. By the end of the week, I made a decision. I would quit. That Friday, after Liam packed up his bag and bounded out to meet a friend, I stayed behind. I walked into the hallway where Nathan was sorting mail on the console table. "Nathan," I began, my voice steady only because I forced it to be. "I think it's best if I—" "Evan," he interrupted softly. "Don't." I froze. He looked up, his expression calm but his eyes unguarded. Tired, pained, and filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Please." "Not yet." I didn't know how to respond. The air between us thickened with all the things we hadn't said since that night. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Privately." I nodded. He led me into the library. A small room at the back of the house I'd never been in before. The walls were lined with old books, and a single window let in late afternoon light, warm and golden. It felt too intimate, too enclosed. Nathan closed the door behind him, then stood still for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. "That night has been difficult to forget," he said finally. I've tried to tell myself it was a mistake, that I crossed a line I had no right to cross. But every time I close my eyes, I remember how it felt." He exhaled, shoulders heavy. "That kiss didn't feel like wrongness to me, Evan. Felt like waking up, like realizing I'd been sleepwalking through years of my life." My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him, but I also wanted to run from the weight of it. "You don't have to say that," I murmured. "It was a moment, nothing more. We were both lonely, maybe confused." He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. "Is that what it was for you?" Confusion. Couldn't lie. Not to him. "I don't know," I said, my voice low. "It's wrong, Nathan. I know that. But when I'm here, when I see you, I stopped, searching for words. It's like everything I thought I understood about boundaries, about control, just blurs." He smiled faintly, though there was no amusement in it. "You're not the only one." The room felt smaller, the air warmer. He took another step forward until we stood only a foot apart. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne. Cedar, paper, and something quietly masculine. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he's not supposed to touch but can't resist. "I've spent years convincing myself that desire was something you grow out of," he said softly. "That at a certain age it fades, replaced by habit and memory. But then you came here, and I started to feel everything again. Not just attraction. Life." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Nathan." He shook his head, almost pleading. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that you've changed something in me. You've reminded me that I'm still human." There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound either cruel or cowardly. So instead, I said the truth, the only one that mattered. "You've changed something in me too." For a moment, neither of us moved. The world outside might as well have stopped. Then, without words, we closed the space between us. The second kiss wasn't hesitant like the first. It was deliberate, slow, deep, and trembling with all the restraint we'd been carrying. His hand came up to my face, fingertips brushing along my jaw before settling at the back of my neck. The warmth of his palm was enough to melt whatever resistance I had left. My own hands found his shoulders, and when our lips met fully, everything else fell away. Guilt, logic, the thin line of propriety we'd both tried so hard to protect. The kiss was tender but weighted, filled with everything we couldn't say aloud. He tasted of wine and quiet desperation. When we finally parted, he kept his forehead against mine, breathing hard. His voice broke the silence in a whisper. "You make me feel like time didn't win." Something inside me cracked at those words. I wanted to say something back, to tell him he made me feel seen in a way I didn't know I needed, but the words tangled in my throat. We stood there, caught in that fragile moment, both knowing it couldn't last. Nathan pulled away first, his expression torn between longing and remorse. "This isn't fair to you," he said quietly. "Or to Liam. You have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't get tangled in mine." I shook my head. "You're not the only one tangled." He laughed softly, a broken sound. "Then maybe we both need to untangle before we do something we can't undo." I nodded, though my heart rebelled at the thought. For the next few seconds, neither of us moved. We just stood there, the light slanting across his face, the faint hum of the clock filling the silence. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched my cheek one last time, his thumb tracing a line as if memorizing me. "Go," he whispered. I did. Outside, the air felt cooler, the evening quieter. But inside me, everything was loud. My thoughts, my heartbeat, the memory of his words. I walked toward my car, each step heavier than the last. Part of me wanted to keep walking until I forgot him completely. But deep down, I knew that was impossible. Some moments, once lived, refused to fade. I knew I should walk away, but every time he looked at me, I forgot why. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm neither of us acknowledged but both relied on. Nothing was said aloud, yet everything was understood. Our conversations, once limited to lesson schedules and homework updates, quietly evolved. Nathan began texting me in the mornings under the guise of logistics. "Liam has an exam next week." Or, "Can we move Thursday's session to Friday?" But after the second or third exchange, the messages changed tone. "Good luck with your thesis defense today. Don't skip lunch again. Coffee's on me next time." I found myself replying faster than I should. "You always remember. You make teaching feel less exhausting. You shouldn't worry about me so much." There was a warmth in those words that went beyond courtesy. They weren't flirtatious, but they carried the weight of something real. Two people tiptoeing around affection without daring to name it. At the house, our glances grew longer, our small touches more deliberate. When we passed in the hallway, his hand might brush against mine. Accidental but not really. Sometimes I'd hand him a paper or a book and feel his fingers linger a fraction too long. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope. Careful, balanced, afraid of falling yet wanting to see what would happen if I did. Couldn't last. We both knew it, but neither of us was ready to let go. One evening in early summer, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of honeysuckle. Liam had texted to say he'd be staying late for a group project. I just finished tutoring him that afternoon, and Nathan invited me to stay for coffee. We sat on the couch in the living room, the glow from the floor lamp softening everything around us. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made you notice the smallest sounds. The tick of the clock, the clink of the coffee spoon, the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. Nathan was talking about a lecture he'd given that day, something about history repeating itself, but I wasn't listening to his words so much as to the cadence of his voice. He looked relaxed, his arm draped over the couch, one leg crossed over the other. At some point, his hand found mine, resting lightly, comfortably, on my knee. We didn't speak for a while. We didn't need to. Then, a sound shattered it, the sharp creak of the front door. We both turned. Liam stood frozen in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. His eyes darted to our hands, still touching, then back to his father. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Then Liam's face hardened. He dropped his backpack onto the floor with a thud and turned away. "Liam," Nathan started, rising quickly. But before he could reach him, the boy was already walking down the hall. The door slammed shut so hard it rattled the frame. The house went utterly still again, Only this time it wasn't peaceful. Nathan's hand fell to his side. He looked like someone who'd just watched years of careful control crumble in seconds. "Oh God," he whispered. "Evan, what have I done?" I stood, my pulse racing. "This is my fault," I said. "I should have left earlier." He turned sharply. "No, don't you dare take this on yourself. You didn't do anything wrong." But the words rang hollow even as he said them. I grabbed my bag, my voice trembling. "I think I should go. Evan." "I'll call tomorrow," I said, though I already knew I wouldn't. "You should talk to him. He needs to hear from you, not me." He didn't stop me. He just stood there in the middle of the living room, the lamplight outlining his figure. Shoulders slumped, eyes haunted. I'd never seen him look so defeated. Outside, the air had cooled, and the sky was darkening. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The image of Liam's face wouldn't leave me. The confusion, the hurt, the betrayal. He'd lost one parent already. Now it must have felt like he was losing another. I thought about starting the engine, driving away, cutting cleanly before the damage spread further. But I couldn't move. The weight of everything, of what we were, what we weren't supposed to be, pressed down until I could barely breathe. A few minutes passed. Then, a knock at my window startled me. Liam. He stood there under the porch light, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, face unreadable. I hesitated, then rolled down the window. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You're still here." "I was just leaving," I said. My voice came out softer than I intended. He nodded slowly, then said, "You don't have to." I blinked. "Liam, I'm sorry. You shouldn't have." He cut me off with a quiet sigh. "Don't. Please. I'm not angry. Not really." He glanced toward the house, then back at me. "I just didn't know. I didn't expect it." His tone wasn't accusing. It was almost protective, though I couldn't tell who he was trying to protect. "He's been different since you started coming here," he continued. "Better. Happier. You're the first person who made him smile in years." I didn't know why until now. The lump in my throat made it hard to speak. "Liam, this isn't something I ever meant to." He shook his head. "I know, but don't run from it." His eyes softened. "He's been a ghost since Mom died. If you're what makes him come back to life, then maybe that's not such a bad thing." I couldn't answer. I just nodded, my vision blurring for a second. He stepped back from the car. "He's inside. You should talk to him. Or not tonight. But don't just disappear." Then, without waiting for my reply, he turned and went back inside, leaving the door open behind him. I sat there for a while, the night air drifting in through the half-open window. For the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like someone being quietly, impossibly accepted. When I finally went back inside, the house was dim, quiet again. I didn't see Liam, but I heard voices from down the hall. Low, emotional, the kind that only happen when truth is finally being told. I waited in the study, sitting where I'd sat 100 times before. My heart pounded as footsteps approached. Nathan appeared in the doorway, eyes red-rimmed but peaceful in a way I hadn't seen before. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the frame. "We talked," he said. "He understands, in his own way." I nodded, too full of emotion to speak. Nathan stepped closer, reaching for my hand but stopping midway, the smallest gesture of restraint that somehow felt more intimate than anything else. "Thank you for not running," he said. I smiled faintly. "I almost did." He chuckled quietly, then shook his head. "You and me both." For a long moment we just stood there, the air between us lighter than it had been in weeks. The silence wasn't haunted anymore. It was alive. The house, once heavy with grief, felt different now, warmer, awake, almost breathing again. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive, like it had been waiting for this moment. Summer melted quietly into autumn. The long days of tutoring gave way to shorter evenings, and before I realized it, everything that had once been temporary began to find its ending. I finished my degree in early September. The ceremony was small, simple. Just names, applause, and the echo of future's beginning. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt an ache for the familiar. The cedar-scented hallways, the sound of pages turning in the coal house, the faint warmth of a voice that had changed the way I saw myself. Liam had improved in ways that surprised even him. His test scores climbed, his confidence grew, and when I handed him the final review packet for college prep, he grinned. "Guess I don't need a tutor anymore," he said. "Looks like you've outgrown me," I replied. He hesitated, then added softly, "Dad says you'll always be more than that." I smiled, unsure what to say. I'd learned that Nathan's way of caring had always been quiet, steady. Never loud enough to draw attention, but impossible to ignore once you felt it. I saw them less after that. Nathan and I had both agreed, wordlessly, to give space where space was needed. The connection between us hadn't vanished. It had simply settled into something calmer, quieter, but no less real. Then, one late October afternoon, a message appeared on my phone. "Can you come to the university tonight? There's something I'd like to show you." It was from Nathan. The campus was mostly empty when I arrived. The wind carried the crisp scent of leaves and old paper, a smell I'd grown to associate with him. The university library stood in half-darkness, its tall windows glowing from a few scattered lamps inside. I found him near the back, where the shelves met in narrow aisles. He looked almost the same, neat as ever, though a little more at ease, as if the months had softened something that grief once kept locked away. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. "You said you had something to show me?" He smiled faintly and held up an old, leather-bound book. The spine was cracked, the pages yellowed and uneven. "It's a poetry anthology," he explained. "I'm teaching it this semester. Thought of you when I read one of the pieces last night." He flipped the book open carefully, as though it might crumble under his touch. The poem he showed me was short, only a few lines, but the words seemed to carry a world inside them. "Love does not come when called, but when it finds the unguarded door. It enters quietly, uninvited, and teaches the heart what time forgot." I traced the faded ink with my eyes, the meaning sinking deeper than the words themselves. "It's about second chances," Nathan said softly, "and how sometimes what we think is forbidden is just mistimed." I looked up at him, the lamplight catching the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. "You believe that?" He met my gaze, steady and unflinching. "I didn't used to." We stood there in the quiet of the library, the air thick with everything unspoken. Somewhere outside, a clock chimed softly, the kind of sound that marked time but didn't interrupt it. Nathan smiled gently. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another young man passing through my house for a few months. I didn't expect you to leave echoes in every room." I laughed under my breath, a little embarrassed. "You make it sound poetic." He shrugged. "Maybe it is." We fell into easy conversation, the kind we'd once shared late at night after lessons. Only now, there was no hesitation between us. He asked about my plans after graduation. I told him about a teaching position I'd been offered at a small school 2 towns over. He listened, proud but quiet, as if weighing what to say next. "You'll be good at it," he said finally. "You have patience and heart. That's rarer than talent. Coming from you, I'll take that as the highest compliment." He smiled, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The space between us felt alive again, full of old memories and something that hadn't yet faded. I moved closer, standing beside him to look at the book again. "You ever think about how strange this is?" I said quietly. "How we ended up here, in this moment, after everything." He turned slightly toward me. "Strange," he said, "but not wrong." Our hands brushed as we reached for the same page, and this time, neither of us pulled away. His fingers were warm against mine, steady and sure. We stayed like that for a while, lost between words and silence. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Evan." I looked up. He leaned in just enough that I could feel the faint warmth of his breath. I don't want to pretend anymore, he murmured. Before I could answer, his lips met mine. A soft, quiet kiss that carried all the things we'd left unsaid. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was patient, certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't demand but promises. When we finally pulled apart, we were both smiling. I thought we weren't supposed to do this, I said, my voice low. He brushed his thumb lightly across my cheek. We were never supposed to do many of the best things in life. That made me laugh, quietly, freely, the way I hadn't laughed in months. We stood there between the shelves, hands entwined, talking until the library lights dimmed one by one. It wasn't a grand ending, no confessions, no declarations. Just two people who had found something worth keeping, even if it didn't fit neatly into anyone else's definition of right.